Well, hello everyone, and it is so good to see you today. My name's Richard. I have the privilege of being a pastor here at Anthem Church and just taking us through this service, which consists of a message and just saying hello to you. And so if you are new into this space, we want to welcome you. Thank you for engaging our content. We trust that we would be able to encourage you today and in your journey toward Jesus or with Jesus. We would so appreciate it if you could, just with your QR reader, just use this QR code and just let us know your name, a contact detail. We don't want to spam you, but we just want to be hospitable and say thank you for engaging today, and maybe we can help you take another step forward in your journey. And so we would really, really appreciate that. And then at the end of the message today, we're going to take up a moment to give, and I just put it here in front just in case you want to already contribute into the story of Anthem. We want to thank you for believing in our ministry, and we will have a moment a little bit later, but just want to give you that opportunity. We are going to turn our attention to the message for today, and my prayer for you is that it would encourage you, it would strengthen you, it would inspire you. It's so good to be sitting in front of you today, and I trust that the message will bring you inspiration and encouragement as we are all kicking off our year and getting into what God has for us. I wonder how many of us have cried out to God for intervention, for provision, for help in these past 2 years. We've prayed, we've tried to make a plan. We've prayed, we've tried to make a plan, and we're just hoping, we're waiting, we're longing for a then God moment. Some of us have received our then God moment. Some of us are still trusting for it. But today I really want to encourage us. I'm really wanting to remind us that God is watching, He is looking, He is waiting for the right time. There is a perfect time in God's order of things. And so I want to be looking at a story from the Old Testament that's a piece of the Bible that refers before Jesus' time, pointing towards Jesus. And we're going to look at a story of a lady and her son, and she has a then God moment. But in the build-up to that moment, there are a couple of things that she acts according to, and some things we can learn from, all things we can learn from. Some things are positive, some things I think we could possibly do a bit different as we trust for our then God moment. And so, as you can see, just entitled today, Then God. Then God, reminding us that there is this partnership that we have with our God in heaven, and we need to continually be looking towards Him and walking with Him, but also that there is a then God moment. You are not alone, and God can powerfully and desires to powerfully move amongst us as a people. And so we're going to base ourselves in Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 to 20. And before I pull it up on the screen, what's happened here is there's a lady who has given birth to a son, and that son is now growing up. He's about 13 years old. And her name is Hagar, and her son's name is Ishmael. And this was a story about Abraham, who is regarded in Jewish tradition as the father of the faith. He was the man that God chose to redeem of all the families in the earth and say, I'm going to put my blessing upon him so that all peoples can see what it is like when God's favor is upon you. There's a story that goes behind that around Abram and his wife Sarah and not being able to fall pregnant, and so Sarah gives her servant Hagar to her husband to try and have a son in order to keep the family line going, and that all goes pear-shaped, as you can imagine. But the story here is about Hagar and Ishmael, and we're going to pick it up in verse 14. And so Genesis chapter 21, verses 14 to 20 is where we're going. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And so she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. And so, as I've said today, just something of my desire is to encourage us, to be encouraged by then God moments in our lives, to have our eyes open to then God moments in our lives. And so there's 5 things that I want to pull out of this text, and we're going to go into each one just to help position us, to help know what our attitude should be, to help know what decisions we should make, and then receiving the blessing of a then God moment. And so we see that she went on her way and wandered in the desert. That's going to be point number 1, just looking around, wandering in the desert. When the water in the skin was gone, what happens when our water seems to have run dry? I cannot watch the boy die. Just how do we interact when there is pain and death and brokenness all around us? Then God, her eyes were opened just in that moment of a then God moment. And then the result of that, God was with the boy as he grew up, just that we can trust that God is with us. And so let's go and look at this. So just firstly, she went on her way and wandered in the desert. None of us have been our sharpest over the past little while. Humanity has been isolated and separated, and human interaction is so important for human flourishing. But I think this is really helpful if we can just own up to the fact that we haven't been at our best. I think if we can own up to that, then we can look for what God still has in store for us. It's felt a little bit like we've been wandering around in the desert. Not quite sure if we're moving in the right direction, certainly feeling a little dehydrated and burned. I know as a pastor, it's been very difficult to fulfill my function, as it has been for all of our businesses, as we've had to try and work out how do we do this? What does the online digital space look like? I'm not able to see people on a weekly basis. I'm teaching through a screen. It all just feels like a little bit less than. And so we've had to put up with wandering in the desert. Just to recount a story, when I was a younger boy and I went fishing with my dad, trout fishing, or he went trout fishing, I went along, and he was fishing in one place and I was sitting with him, and then he said he's just going to go a little bit further down the river. Do I want to go with him? And I said, no, actually I was busy playing in the sand or doing something like that. And I said, no, I'm going to stay here. But you know how time seems to, it's all relative to the number of years that we've lived. And so I'm a little boy, my dad's fishing, I don't know how long he'd been gone, but for me, it felt like an eternity. I got bored and it was like, okay, no, this is no good. I need to go and find my dad. And so I got up and wandered off to go and try and find him. I think if I were today's age, he was no more than 500, 600 meters down the river fishing. But to me, I couldn't see him and I couldn't find him, and I was wandering around and I started to feel a little anxious. I felt a little bit lost, like I didn't know, and maybe I needed to go back to the point where he left me. I waited there for a little bit longer. I got a bit desperate. I could see the house that we were staying at up the bank across the river, and so well, maybe I need to go there. And so I jumped into the river to swim across and started to get washed downstream. It's not a very big story. Thankfully, I made it across, but there was a moment when I was being washed downstream before I got to the bank and got home safely, and it all ends well. But just anxiety and kind of, what have I done? And just as I was preparing this and thinking about wandering around, there was that moment where I was wondering and I felt lost. I started to get anxious, and it caused me to make a decision which actually potentially harmed my life. And that's what wandering around does. We need to understand that wandering is part of a result of broken humanity. Wandering around is not God's blessing for us, as His desire is that we would live with purpose and desire and life. And so when we are wandering around, our question is not, what is God doing? Our question should rather be, what is my way out? Because God's desire is that there is a way out of our wandering. Wandering is part of sinful, broken humanity, not part of God's desire and plan. And too many of us, in our wandering around, we're looking for reasons, like, God, what are you doing in this wandering? And I want to say to you as a pastor today, God can use those times, but His desire is not to hold us in a place of wandering, trying to teach us a lesson. His desire is that we would get out of there as quickly as possible into a life of purpose and desire and life. We see in John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus came and says to us that I am the way, and that scripture is on the truth and the life, but I am the way. And so when we feel like we're wondering, there is an offer from Jesus. Stop your wondering and follow me. That's the invitation. I know where I'm going, Jesus says, and I want to take you there. And so the inevitable question is, how do we find Jesus? How do we find Jesus? When we're not our best, when we feel like we're wondering, when we feel lost, alone, a little anxious, a little depressed, how do we find Him? Well, I'll just say three things to us. His Word. We find Him in His Word, we find Him by His Spirit, and we find Him in His community. And so if you are wandering around at this point in time, if you're feeling a little lost, if you're feeling a little anxious, if you're feeling a little bit like, I don't know where I'm going, and you don't want to make a decision that could wash you down river, so to speak, then may I encourage you, look for Jesus in these manners. Look for Him in His Word. Go to His Word. Look for Him by His Spirit. Spend time asking the Spirit of God to reveal to you, and spend time with His community. Press into His community. The second thing we see with Hagar and her son is when the water in the skin was gone. When the water in the skin was gone. So she was trusting for a then God moment. And I think all of us have felt over the last little while, or certainly at some point in our lives, that the water had run dry. Just a picture I have is of an old school wooden slatted bucket. And we can have multiple, those slats can be all perfect and high, and it just takes one slat to have a hole in it, or one slat on the side of the bucket to be broken for all the water to drain. And I think this reflects something of our lives, that we can have so many areas of our life in order, but it just takes one area for all of us to feel, for the whole of our lives, for the whole of our souls to feel like the water has drained away. And so we need to give attention to it. And so I want to ask us, as we kind of kick off this year, as we trust for a then God moment, can we identify that one slat or those two slats that are maybe broken or with a hole in it? We can't keep commending ourselves about all the things that are in order. We thank God for that and well done for that. But those things that are out of order, those things that are broken, the low points in the bucket, can we give attention to that as well? And also, we look for so many different water sources to keep us full. So many different water sources. But there's only one that truly satisfies us. The others are all pretenders. If we read in John chapter 4, verses 9 to 14, I'll read the whole thing, but just verse 14 will come up on the screen. It says this: Then the Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" Jesus has met a Samaritan woman at a well where there's water to drink. He says, "How can you ask me for a drink? Because Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and this well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also all his sons and his livestock?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life." And so just this second lesson that we can learn from Hagar's life, when her water ran out and she didn't know now she was going to dehydrate and head towards death. Just look at our slats in the bucket. Let's give attention. Let's identify where our holes are, our brokenness, bring those into order with God, by His Spirit, with His community this year. Let's give attention to that. And let's also look to the one that truly satisfies, Jesus Christ, not to all of the pseudo or the false satisfiers where we look to drink from. The third thing we see is she says, she moves off a little bit and says, I can't sit with my boy. I cannot watch the boy die. I think all of us over the past little while have watched some things die. We've all seen too much death at this time, and that could be death physically and through physical illness. But possibly it could be relationships that may end or may have ended or look like they're going to end. It could look like businesses that have ended or could end. It looks like there's no necessary no end in sight for physical illness. So how do we react to death or to the fear of death? And this is where I think we can learn a valuable lesson from Hagar. So at a time when she was facing death, she removed herself when her son needed her the most. But with Jesus, He gave Himself when we needed him the most. And so when we're trusting for this then God moment, can we learn from the story of Hagar, who removed herself from her son? Her son would have been looking at her, 13 years old. There's no more water. Mom, you need to provide for me. I'm going to die. And she moves off. I can't watch the boy die. As we face the death, and that could be in inverted commas, that could be real, just as we experience brokenness and pain and things that are dying all around us, how do we respond? Do we remove ourselves because we can't watch it? Or do we take hold of Jesus, who gave himself when we needed him the most? In John chapter 10, verse 10, it says this, I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. We need to understand that Jesus doesn't step away and watch us die from a distance. He steps closer and offers us life. And so what do we choose? What do we choose? What do we choose when we see death all around us? Do we choose to step towards Jesus and receive life, or do we step away and allow death to overshadow as we turn our head and say we cannot look upon these things? See, the offer from Jesus Christ today is that he comes to offer life. He steps towards us, not away from us in this broken, dying world. There is death all around us. We need to make peace with that fact, that is going to continue to happen until Jesus comes again, because sin and brokenness will continue to be the effect until he renews the heavens and the earth. And so we need to keep finding our way out of wandering by looking to him. I am the way. We need to keep giving attention to our buckets, those things that are out of order, and keep looking towards him, the one that truly satisfies our thirst and water. And when we are confronted with death, that we don't shy away and move away, but rather we take hold of Jesus, who came that we may have life and have it to the full. Then this incredible moment comes, her then God moment. Her eyes were opened and she saw a well of water. I imagine I can only dream or imagine what that moment was like. Imagine you're dying. You've run out of water. You're in the desert. You've been pushed away from your family, as she had been by Abraham. She can't even look upon her son because she's feeling so many things. Like, I don't want to watch my boy die. Maybe ashamed that she can't take care of her. Maybe frustrated, angry. All of those things in that moment. And then God. And he opens her eyes, and there's a well of water. And I've often given thought of it, like, why couldn't she see that before? And I've had this thought going around this week while I've been preparing. It's just God could equally have created a well in a moment out of nothing. There could legitimately not have been a well there that Ishmael and Hagar, for them to see. And he could have created it in a moment. Equally, he could have kept their eyes closed for this then God moment, and the well was always there. It makes no difference. God's provision was there. As she experienced the then God moment, her eyes were opened and she saw a well of water. It would indicate that her eyes were opened, would indicate that the well was always there. She just couldn't see it until such time as she reached that point where she was crying out to God, trusting for a then God, praying, waiting, praying, hoping, waiting, then God. And so I want to ask us these three questions. What are we possibly missing through our wandering? We've gone wandering and we haven't found the way out. What are we missing through our wandering? What are we not seeing through our tears? It says in the scripture that Hagar, through her tears, she was crying at the potential loss of her son as she was staring death in the face. What are we letting slip through our grasp with our leaky water buckets? All asking the same question, but through wandering, through brokenness and a hole and a lack of order, through our tears, what are we potentially missing that's right in front of us? Our then God moment. Just want to share this story, and many of you know that as Anthem Church in Durban, we are looking to relocate our premises to Cornubia, a land that we feel that God has shown us. Sometime last year, I was on an aeroplane with another pastor, and we're going somewhere. He was telling me a story of a church planter in Stellenbosch in the Cape, who had just been offered this most amazing property, hectares of a wine estate with vineyards and buildings, and it was tailor-made for an auditorium, for a meeting venue, and kids' facilities and offices, and must have been worth tens of millions of rands. And God moved upon the owner of that, and they offered it to this church plant for just a couple million rand. And my first response was like, oh God, why could we not have received that? And this pastor that I was sitting on the aeroplane next to me, just as quick as a flash, said, hey Rich, God can equally reduce the price of a property or give all the money and produce all the money that's needed for a commercial purchase. But what is God doing in you? And I remember having sat with the elders 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and saying, I feel like I've got faith for 10 million rand. And so this property came through, and it was going to be a 15 million rand purchase price. And I know that number you might go, what? How do we do this? But we're a people that walk with God. And I said to God, you're joking. I've got faith for 10 million rand. 15 is beyond me. And he goes, that's exactly why I needed it to be that. Because if it was 10 million, who knows who would have taken the credit for that? I know that there is deceit in my heart and brokenness in my heart, and I would like to think that I would give God the glory, whether it was 1 million, 10 million, or 15 million. But this is without doubt beyond my own capability of leading and us as a community. It's so far beyond what we could do as a community. And yet, during COVID, under economic crunch, 15 million has been produced to buy a property. And I just think of that story, the church planter who doesn't have access to those kind of funds in his community, and God reduces a price and produces a property already built. What a beautiful story. What's our story? Well, there's a piece of land and it costs this much more than what we would have liked, but we've seen God in it, and so both of us are encouraged by what God has done. He could equally produce a well out of nothing, or he could open our eyes to the well that always existed. These are the stories of God that we get to walk with. You see, faith requires us to keep moving with God, not for us to have all the answers. Romans chapter 8 says this, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And so, friends, just to remind us, our then God moment is a faith journey. It's not about us making a plan. It's not about us having the answers. It's about us finding the way before him and trusting that he will come in and do the miracle. But our eyes, we've got to wipe the tears away from our eyes. We've got to remain pressed into Jesus, not walking away, turning away from the things that he wants to do amongst us. The then God moment. And then just lastly, in terms of Hagar's story, is God was with the boy as he grew up. Friends, I want to remind you that God's attention is toward you. He is watching. He desires to be involved. We can't see him when our back is turned away from him. We can't see him when our back is turned away from him. I think too many times we don't have the then God moment because our backs are turned away from the work that he wants to show us or the word he wants to speak to us. And so may I encourage you, friends, to turn towards him. Matthew chapter 28 verse 20 says this, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So that means from now to the end of the age, there is not a moment that he is not with us. And so if we would just reorientate ourselves, learn from Hagar's story, be encouraged by Hagar's then God moment, that could be our story too. And so if I can just remind us, from this story, she went on her way and wandered in the desert. When we are wondering, the question is not, what is God doing? But rather, what is my way out? How do we find Jesus? Through his word, through his spirit, through his community. When the water in the skin was gone, that was her story. For us, what does that mean? Well, let's identify the attention. Let's identify the holes in our leaky bucket so that we can give attention to that. Not boasting in the 5 things that we've got all hunky-dory, but there's one that's just busy leaking out all the water for us to quench our thirst. And let's also not look to the different water sources to keep us full, but to the only one true water source, Jesus Christ, that satisfies. When Hagar says, I cannot watch the boy die, she removed herself when her son needed her the most, but Jesus gave himself when we needed him the most. What do we choose when we see brokenness and pain and death all around us? Do we choose to remove ourselves, or do we run to Jesus and do we take hold of the life that he offers us? Then God, number 4, her eyes were opened and she saw a well of water. God could equally create a well or close eyes and open eyes to the well that already existed. There are wells all around us, friends, and our eyes, we can't see through our tears. We can't see through our pain, our brokenness. We can't see because of our leaky, broken slat. We can't see. And so we're trusting that God would open our eyes. Faith requires us just to keep moving with God, not for us to have all the answers. And then lastly, God was with the boy as he grew up. God's attention is towards you, friend. He is watching. He desires to be involved. We can't see him when our back is turned away from him. Friends, I trust that this story of Hagar's encourages us that we have then God moments. Many of us, even engaging this, have experienced our then God moment. And we can encourage others, and we're still trusting for more then God moments. There's not only one then God moment, but I also know that there are many of you engaging here that are trusting deeply for a then God moment. I want to speak life and faith into you. Turn towards Jesus. He has come to you in order to offer you life. He has not turned his back from you. Keep pressing in, keep trusting, keep being obedient, keep looking at his word, keep looking by his spirit, keep pressing into community. We can do these things as we walk with God by faith for him to reveal the wells that are all around us, the wells that we need at this time. May I encourage you to keep pressing into the Anthem story as we desire to lead people to life. Let's look for the opportunities to engage others around our faith. Give them hope. Let's pull people towards this online platform. Let's pull people towards our in-person services and the community. I want to encourage you to engage, friends, not just by listening to a sermon here in an online space, being a part of what we're about, sowing of your financial resources, giving of your gifts. Let's build up this community. Let's pray for the Cornubia move as we look for 2022 to be a significant journey for us in something of this transition, as we continue to be a reconciling people, as we reconcile ourselves to God and others with God, but also one to each other. And so I want to encourage you to come and be a part of the mission of Anthem as we go. And so I want to close out with this prayer from Ephesians chapter 3, 16 to 19. It says this: I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power, together with all the Lord's holy people, to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Let's commit to going on that journey, friends. Take a step forward today. If you've never made a decision to put your life into Jesus' hands, maybe you want to do that today. Would you get hold of us at info@anthem.org.za, and we would love to help you take your next step in faith in Jesus. Bless you. Well, thank you again for being a part of the message. I trust that it was helpful to you. I trust there's some life lessons that we can learn from it. And I am trusting and praying for your then God moment. And so thank you so much for being with us. We encourage you to remain engaged with us on all of our media platforms, our social media platforms. Continue to keep up to speed with what's going on with us as an Anthem community, and continue to keep taking steps towards community. We believe that it is God's pattern on earth for health and flourishing, and so continue to do that. We want to thank all of you that have been a part of continuing to faithfully steward your finances and your resources, for believing in the ministry of Anthem Church, what God's doing through us, for being a part of this story. And so we will take up a moment now to give, and there's a Zapper code here, but all our banking details are on our website, anthem.org.za, for EFT, which would be preferable, but we would encourage you to go on a journey of looking at what godly stewardship of finances look like. Get hold of us. If you don't know what the patterns of Scripture teach, we on an annual basis do teach that, but you don't have to wait for those messages. You can get hold of us at info@anthem.org.za, and we would love to help you know how to order your finances in a godly manner. Maybe your leaky bucket, maybe the one hole is in your finances being in disarray or in disorder. We would love to help you find God's favor and God's blessing and God's order in the way you manage your finances. And so thank you so much, friends. We appreciate you being a part of what God is doing amongst us, and we will catch you same time next week.